On some occasions, I happened to be there and listened to their thunderous liturgy and musical chanting, mingled with tears. I beheld the two elders, emaciated and exhausted from fasting. One stood in the altar before the Lord's throne, weeping, unable to pronounce the exclamations due to his tears, only sighing deeply from the heart and barely uttering the words. The other stood on the cliros, also weeping, and from his tears, sobbing, and bodily frailty, he could barely be heard at all. I, a sinner, standing amidst such great, fiery pillars, was seized with fear and awe, not knowing where to direct my hearing, toward the altar or behind me. I was moved to weeping from everywhere, and though human ears could hear but little, the Lord Himself beheld their liturgy according to the promise. To whom will I look? To him that is humble and quiet and trembles at my word. Isaiah chapter 66, line 2. Here they chanted the Trisagion hymn, having no earthly cares whatsoever, truly thinking of nothing worldly. Here, amidst the two of them, the Lord Himself dwelt in accordance with His promise. For where two or three are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. Matthew chapter 18, line 20. These two elders loved their Lord so fervently, and they did not wish to part with Him for even a moment, but always delighted in communion with Him, in mind, in heart, and in speech. Their only conversations were about prayer, about for God and love for their neighbor. If anyone spoke negatively about their brother in their presence, they would immediately end the conversation. They loved every neighbor more than themselves, as was clearly evident from their deeds. They always strove to bring peace to all. Whoever came to them with a need, they would not let him leave their cell in sorrow. If someone grieved over bodily needs, they would help him, even beyond their means. At times, they would pawn their last books and later redeem them when God provided. If someone suffered spiritual distress, they would comfort him with their gracious words. The poor found helpers in them, the sorrowful consolers, those enslaved by passions and sins, swift correction and deliverance. As for myself, I will say this. When I arrived at the holy Mount Athos, I had almost no money at all. Father Arsenios blessed me to learn how to carve small spoons, but I had nothing with which to buy the necessary tools. When I confided this to him, he said to me, "Do not worry about that." He then took a small pouch from the window, poured out the money, counted it, and gave me everything he had, saying, "Take this. I have only 30 left in total." I burst into tears and said, "Holy Father, but what have you left for yourself?" He replied, "We will be provided. Do not worry about us. God will send us what we need. How much money do you need for the tools?" I told him that I needed 50 left. He then went to the church, brought back a book, handed it to me, and said, "Go and pawn this at the Koreneus," two Russian monks, cousins, who lived in the cell of the Transfiguration of the Lord across from the Kutlumush monastery, "and take as much money as you need. I will redeem it later." Oh, how much tears it cost me! I wept the entire way. His first question to everyone was always, "Are you content? Do you have any need?" I will also recount an incident that happened during my time at the feast of the Dormition of the Most Holy Theotokos. One of my spiritual brothers, named Theocritus, took all the money he had, 150 left, to buy himself a cassock and some clothes for the feast. However, he lost everything and became extremely sorrowful and distressed. Seeing him, the spiritual elder, Father Arsenios, asked, "Why are you so downcast?" Theocritus explained that he had lost all his money. The elder asked him, "Do you have a great necessity?" Then, taking out his small pouch, he handed to him everything he had, saying, "Here, I have only 60 left. Go and buy what you need." Theocritus accepted the money and left, but soon after he began to reflect. "I am a young man, capable of working, but they are old and weak, and yet they gave me their last coins. They trust in God that they will be fed. Will the Lord abandon me? I will go and return the money." He went back and tried to give the money back to Father Arsenios, but the elder refused to take it. Falling at his feet with tears, Theocritus barely managed to convince him to accept it. Taking the money back, the elder then asked, "Will you not regret this?" Theocritus answered, "No, Holy Father, now I feel joyful because you have taken it back." They lived for many years in their desert solitude, but eventually they developed a desire to go to the holy city of Jerusalem and venerate the life giving tomb of Christ, and the Lord did not forsake his servants. In 1836, a Hieromonk named Anikita, Prince Shilinsky Shikhmatov, a great ascetic, arrived on the holy mountain from Russia. He traveled across all of Mount Athos, visited these two ascetics in their hermitage, engaged in spiritual conversation with them, and grew to love them deeply. He chose Father Arsenius as his spiritual father. Then he asked them, "Would you be willing to travel to Jerusalem with me?" They agreed. The prince was overjoyed to have such companions. They made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, spent the entire winter there, and after celebrating Holy Pascha, returned to the Holy Mountain and settled once again in their cell. But I personally heard from the spiritual father himself that during their journey to Jerusalem, they endured such tribulations that only God knows. I asked him, "What kind of hardships, Father, and why did they befall you? Was it due to a lack of bodily necessities?" He answered me, "No, we lacked nothing. God and people provided for us abundantly. In Jerusalem, the pilgrims gave us gold coins as gifts, but by the grace of God, we gave them all away to the poor Arabs. But the hardships were of a different kind. Having spent so many years in the desert, we had almost forgotten the world, and suddenly we found ourselves in the midst of great commotion. Our greatest struggle was with fasting. Everyone there rejoiced, honored us, and invited us to partake of their hospitality, but we could not bear it. We only felt sorrow and did not know how we would endure this until we could return to the holy mountain. Upon returning to the holy mountain, Father Nicolaus pleaded with his spiritual father not to allow any visitors into their cell so that he would not be disturbed. A year before Father Nicolaus's death, both of them received a revelation in a dream. Father Nicolaus heard a voice telling him that he was already crossing the great and stormy sea and was approaching the peaceful harbor. Father Arsenius also heard a voice saying that he was nearing the great and beautiful city, finishing his journey. The two elders shared their visions with each other, recognized them as being from God and understood that their departure was near. Then they added fasting to fasting and tears to tears, preparing themselves for their passing. 6 months before his death, Father Nicholas lost his physical sight, but his spiritual vision remained clear. For God revealed to him his holy servants who were still living on the holy mountain. He confided this to Father Arsenios, fearing that he might fall into some demonic deception. Father Arsenios warned him sternly and forbade him to trust in such visions, telling him instead to weep before God and seek forgiveness for his sins. Father Nicolaus also suffered from other physical ailments. He could no longer go to church and spent most of his time sitting on his bed, refusing to lie down on his side. Yet, when the spiritual father wished to serve the divine liturgy on a Saturday or Sunday, he would come to Father Nicolaus' cell and say, Father Nicolai, we should serve a liturgy. To which Father Nicolaus would cheerfully reply, Serve, Father. The spiritual father would then say, How can I serve? You are sick and I cannot serve alone. Father Nicolaus would answer, I will come and help you. Then he would rise from his bed, go with him, read the prayers, and together they would celebrate the divine liturgy. After receiving the holy mysteries, the body and blood of Christ, Father Nicolaus would take a prosphora and sustain himself with it for nearly a week, consuming no other food, and so they lived for 6 months. Every week there was a divine liturgy, and sometimes even two. And though the singer and reader was sick and blind, he never faltered and was always ready for his obedience. On the mid-fair Saturday, they also served a liturgy. Then Nicholas went to his cell, while the spiritual father, having titiated up, returned to his own. Shortly after, Nicholas came to the spiritual father, fell at his feet, and said, Forgive me, Holy Father, for coming to you at an improper time, for I have something necessary to tell you. The spiritual father said, May God forgive you. Speak what you have to say. Then Nicholas, filled with tears, began to speak. Holy Father, when I went to my cell after the liturgy and sat on my bed, at that very moment my eyes were opened, and I began to see clearly, and at once the door of my cell opened, and their entire room was filled with light. 3 men entered, 2 young men holding candles, and between them a man in priestly vestments, shining with indescribable glory. They approached me, and the man in the vestments said, Do you recognize me? Do you know who I am? I was filled with boldness and replied, Truly I recognize you. He asked again, And who am I? I answered him, Truly you are Father Anicetus, our friend and companion on the journey to Jerusalem, and it has been 3 years since you passed away. Then he began to speak to me. Indeed, Nikolai, it is I. Do you see with what glory my heavenly King Jesus Christ has rewarded me? And he will also reward you. In 4 days you will be freed from all suffering and sickness, and the Lord has sent me to comfort you. And immediately they left the cell, and I was left alone. My eyes were closed again, but my heart was filled with indescribable joy. The spiritual father, having heard this, said to him, Beware, Nikolai, lest you be tempted, and do not trust in this, but place your hope on God and ask for his mercy. Nicholas again said, Holy Father, forgive me. Let the Lord's will be done upon me, but my heart has been filled with undescribable joy. I ask you, Father, serve the liturgy every day from now on, and I will prepare myself and partake of the holy mysteries. The spiritual father said to him, very well, I will serve, but there must be no hindrance from your side. And then Nicholas returned to his cell. The divine liturgy was served on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, and Nicholas partook the holy mysteries, feeling some relief. On Wednesday of the cheese week, the hours were read, and on Thursday the liturgy was served again. Nicholas read and sang during the liturgy and partook of the holy mysteries. Afterward, as was customary, the spiritual father handed him a prosphora, but he did not take it and only said, Father, come to my cell. The spiritual father followed him. Nicholas sat on his bed, his back against the wall, and his face began to change, becoming flushed. Then, lifting his eyes to heaven, he was caught up in ecstasy. When he came to himself, he began to speak. I thank you, Holy Father, for enduring all my shortcomings until the end of my life and for leading me to the kingdom of heaven. The spiritual father asked him, Nikolai, what do you see? He replied, Father, I see that the messengers have come for me and have torn up my sinful record. Now, Father, give me your blessing. The spiritual father said, May God bless you. Nicholas then said, Bless me with your hand. The spiritual father blessed him with his hand. Nicholas took his hand, kissed it, and before releasing it, lifted his eyes to heaven and quietly uttered, Lord, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And at that very moment he surrendered his soul to the Lord, whom he had served from his youth with faith and love. Truly, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. Psalms 116, line 15. The news reached us on Saturday evening, and we arrived on Sunday, the fourth day after his passing. Many of the Russian brethren gathered for his burial, all disciples of Father Arsenios. Everyone marveled. Nikolaos lay as if still alive, his face unchanged, his hands and feet not stiffened but soft, like those of the living. A sweet fragrance, like incense, emanated from his mouth, and all the brethren rejoiced and glorified God. He was buried during Cheese Week, and afterward everyone departed.